So we have about a half an hour for refreshments. I'm going to suggest the panel speak amongst themselves. Any further thoughts you all have, having heard before, two presentations, and then we'll immediately go to wider conversation. So, anyone want to get in again on these issues?
Oh, sure. I'm always interested. So I want to know a little bit more first. So would your position pretty well be that a face value interpretation of Terry's work is simply incompatible with a neo-Thomistic theology?
Honestly, what is the crucial question for me is the philosophical question, not theological one. Because I think theologically, Terry does not develop, theological aspect of it that much. And my short criticism here, presented here, and the response are, I think it's true and honest, and I accept. And I don't want to say that you are, promoting any kind of atheism or anything like that. But I think the crucial point is the nature of those absences, because you tend to use causal language all time in many different points of your works. And I think it is problematic because if it is a causal, if absences have causal aspects to them, so what is this causation about? In a way, especially coming from a scientific point of view, there must be, a point where it affects in a certain way the system. But if they are not doing work, which as I said, I agree with, then the source of work must be somewhere else. And I would say absences are always about, because they are always about something, and but I don't think they are a source of aboutness.
Let me respond to that, because I think it's a good question. And the first thing is that I think the English language and most language makes it difficult to talk without the concept of cause. And so I think you're right, it's very difficult to not do that. As it's very difficult oftentimes not to use anthropomorphic terminology to talk about things. I really just that's part of our challenge here. I do think that when you've talked about causes, I talk about particularly one, and I tried to make a sense of this in this paper, in fact, is that when I talk about the causality that's associated with absence, I mean it very much, I think, like Aristotle would mean a formal cause. Formal cause does not do work, and that's what I want to say. My point about work, which I do make in the chapter on work in my book, is that work is a consequence, from an if you were to put it in Aristotelian terms, you need both formal and efficient processes in order to produce work. You need to constrain an efficient process. You need to constrain the release of energy or the increase in entropy. If you constrain it in some way, work can be done because that constraint can then be used to push something else away from its most probable state, away from a higher entropy to lower entropy. So I think the very concept of work, which we oftentimes confound with the term causality, I think requires both formal and efficient life talk. And so I think the danger is when we talk about bottom-up and top-down causality, oftentimes I think what we're doing is we're sticking it into kind of an efficient model. And I think that's the mistake. And formal causality, as I would say it, is always at the level that it appears. It's always between something. It's created, it's not in the parts, and it's not in the whole as a top-down effect. It's at that level. And in that respect, it gets rid of this top-down, bottom-up causality, which I think is an overextension of the efficient causality.
Any further comments?
Just a clarification. So you say if you were talking about causality between different levels of formal cause, then that's just kind of it's a multi-level causality, basically. Each cause works at, okay.
That's right. So they emerge at those levels. If there's no interaction, there's no emergence.
Okay,
Nothing to happen, right?
okay.
But this is another piece of this story. And this has to do with that interdependent co-arising, however you want to look at it, or the very, what I would call the relational nature of existence. I think that given that, this is inevitable, given that that all existence is a relational thing, then there's always a level at which you can generate new kinds of causality.
I have a slightly different follow-up to that question. Could you say something about material cause? You don't talk about the material cause very much.
I've struggled with the concept of material
Okay.
cause. And in fact, part of the problem is that when, for example, I look at what an atom is, I said this a little bit about an oxygen atom just a minute ago. An atom is stable. We often say it's got material properties. It has dispositions, maybe. But if we look at the atom as a physicist would, we would say that it has these because there are certain constraints on its electron clouds. There are certain constraints of resonance that are holding this thing together and also holding the nucleus together, certain kinds of resonant relationships. They're relationships. They're formal in that sense. And there's also, of course, there's energetic relationships. There's tensions. It's like the strung bow. There's tensions that are holding it there. But they're in balance. And they're in balance in part because there's this sort of resonance feature like harmonics that are holding the system together. Because those are, you might say, states that don't interfere with each other. And one of the things you can think about, I like to think about electron clouds as falling into states that don't interfere with each other. Because their resonances, in a sense, are complementing each other at various levels. So, in that respect, if I was to look for atoms as providing the dispositions for the material cause, if that was the material cause I was after, I don't think it's the same as Aristotle's material cause, by the way, that I would have to go down another level. And at some point I just stopped because I don't understand the quantum stuff. And maybe we can't understand it in those terms. I'm stopped. Now, if we're talking about something that has to do with something like what Aristotle would call prime matter, I don't know how to put that into the story. The fact that there's relation rather than non-relation, something rather than nothing, that's outside of my game. I don't know what to say about it. So in the book, I use 3 of them because I just don't know where to put material cause.
Thank you.
Okay, let's open it up. Questions from everyone? Actually, you've already asked one, so let's just, maybe others who want to go first, otherwise, that's fine. Okay.
I'd like to just say one more thing on this issue of the 4 causes. The Greek word for the causes is atia, and the atia means responsibility. Now, we in English use the word cause because Thomas Aquinas used causa finalis. But the idea means responsible. Who is responsible? And it's a word from the court of law. It's very important to understand that these are all very, very different in the way they influence. Even the word influence isn't the correct word for it. So you have 4 things, says Aristotle, that are responsible for anything happening, any entity coming into being. And formal cause is not efficacious. Absences are not efficacious, but they're not nothing because there either used to be something there and it's no longer there, or there's a tendency that was curbed and now is not happening. One of the things that does, and it's almost always overlooked, is what does that leave room for now? What does this absence leave room for now? Take, for example, absences in a Darwinian natural selection. In Darwinian natural selection, you have reproduction with positive gain. All the species are reproducing with positive gain. Not all of them succeed. A lot of them die off. And that leaves room for the others. Whole species die off. That leaves room for another. We wouldn't be here if the dinosaurs hadn't died off. Guaranteed.
Yeah, but at the same time, Aristotle has a notion of privation. You can use the word absence, and to which he always adds that absence is not per se a cause of anything. It is only per accidents a cause, because the source of potentiality for Aristotle is always primary matter, right?
The source of what?
Source of potentiality is primary matter.
Yeah, it's pure potency.
Yeah, it's pure potency. So not absence, but pure potency. So we have to be aware of that. What speaking in
Oh yes, no,
Aristotelian
absence is definitely not prima materia. No. But absence is, what I'm pleased about in what you said was that you point out that there's still a puzzle here that we have not articulated well enough. Absolutely right. And we may not even have conceived it well enough. But, so I'm very pleased that you're pointing it in, because that's what's needed out of you. But I do think we can get there. I think we can work out why the absences are so important, because we observe that they are. It's kind of just phenomena. We observe that they're important, but then how did they do that? So that's my only comment.
Thank you.
Bruce, I want to tell Joshua, when you display a lot of mysticism, why didn't you put Meister Eckhart as a word?
I thought about talking about Meister Eckhart, but mainly constraints of time.
And I want to talk to Dr. Deacon. When I listened to the previous lecture today and last year in JD School. When I see you, when I listen to your lecture, I'm from Korea. There are, I think, 3 or 4 Eastern people here. When I see you, I think Lao Tzu resurrect
Yes,
in Berkeley, I think.
absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I'm wondering, you got your idea from the Tao Te Ching or some?
I did. You've hit the nail on the head. When I was in high school, I became very interested in, as we all do, many things. And I came across the Tao Te Ching. And reading it completely changed my thinking. And in my book, Incomplete Nature, the head of the chapter 1, which is actually the second chapter in the book, because the first chapter is chapter 0, is a line from the Tao Te Ching about the hole at the wheel's hub. And that, I think, encapsulates the logic of everything I've said. So in many respects, I think it's part of it should be part of the apophatic story.
Yeah.
The difference is that, unlike the apophatic story, it's about both presence and absence and how they both need each other. It's about the masculine and feminine, the active and the passive, and how they're part of the same. And I think it's one of the most incredible books ever written.
In this sense, I think when you talk about the Western people or Christianity, touch on the Buddhism or Taoism, I hope you not just accessory things. I think you really need already emergent ideas of philosophy in the Eastern side. And so I think if Western Christian mysticism ideas come together with Eastern Taoism or Buddhism, we can make this world more better for new emerging society. And so I think really it's very important. So in this conference or in this Science and theology talk, I hope you can also touch on the Eastern philosophy. And I think
I definitely want to do
Yeah.
that. So to be honest with you, I was a bit embarrassed that I didn't spend more time on Lao Tzu. Along with Heraclitus, and along with Gautama, the Buddha, Lao Tzu is one of the major voices of wisdom that should be equivalent in this discussion.
And it all speaks to this particular idea. And interestingly enough, that's in the three quadrants of the world during the axial age.
All
These
happen at
ideas
once, yeah.
arising, understanding of absence, of nothing, of impermanence.
And I'm kind of philosopher and a theologian. I'm a PSR student. So I think I'm really happy and I'm thankful for you as a scientist. You really regain the value, purpose, and meaning to the science, to this dialogue. But I think from now on, the theological, religious people, how we can emerge, develop, or involve the value of meaning. We just find out there's meaning, there's purpose. We should not restrict it, we should not miss it. But from now on, how will this value and meaning, purpose go? So in this sense, I emphasize again that communication, Eastern philosophy,
I love the sentiment. I mean, the answer, as I see it, is that we are probably, in hindsight, if we were to look back 500 years from now, I think this century will probably be considered a transitional axial age. That is, something has changed. What's changed is that we have this massive new information about the world that we didn't have when we came up with these ideas, as brilliant as they were. And the real challenge for the spiritual, writ large perspective is to make sure that that schism falls apart, that the synthesis is put together. And I do think that requires bringing in Eastern and Western wisdom traditions along with the science and saying, okay, what is the metaphysics that this next axial age will be built on?
Let me just say, that's one of the great things about the GTU. We have an Institute for Hindu Studies, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, and so this, at the doctoral level, we're becoming interreligious in a really fundamental way. And that's a very important part of the next generation of GTU.
That's wonderful.
Okay, I see two hands.
I was just going to point out that the cover of this book is a sculpture by a Korean artist.
It is. It is. It took Ty and I took a great deal of effort to find him. I saw. I'm going to tell you the story of this. I found, by the way, that it's not quite his sculpture, of course.
You'd fit.
I fiddled with it, but I found it on Facebook with somebody's photos from their trip from Seoul, and I said, this captures the idea that I want to get across in an image. Who did it and where was it? It took us a long time, and Ty has a very prominent good friend in Korea that actually searched this man out and translated it and worked between us to get this so that he could do it, and he was so happy to have me use this. It's just a wonderful gift.
It's a real revelatory picture, I think. I would say one characteristic in Korea, Korea can be called the religion department store. They have both holiday, Buddha's birthday and Jesus' birthday. We don't have serious conflicts like here. So our spiritual tradition, all except Islam, all the great religion really prospered. So Taoism and Buddhism and Christianity and Confucianism. As you know, wherever Korean people go, they set up a church. The Chinese people set up a restaurant, a Japanese center. So I know.
Well, back. Time.
So I have a question, I love these questions about absences. I approach absences from a quantum mechanical point of view because I'm a physicist. And one of the obvious effects of absences comes to play in laser physics in related areas. Laser physics talks about emission of photons from atoms into a field. Now the field can be a vacuum field, which means there's an absence of light in it, or it can be an occupied field. The nature of the emission process is totally different when you have stimulated emission, either photons in the field, and when you have spontaneous emission, and there's no photons in the field. Is that an example of an absence that would be a physical absence that would fit your criteria?
The truth is, I don't know how to parse the story. Now, I do understand how lasers work. I see the process of it. I see laser production as a kind of self-organization. It amplifies constraints, particularly when you're driving the laser. You're amplifying constraints by virtue of the synchrony between the emitted light and how that emitted light, in a sense, amplifies more emitted light. By virtue of the synchrony that it produces. I haven't thought about the absent aspect of it. Certainly we're talking about constraint when we talk about this. That is the constraint of those frequencies and phases that are not part of the general population, are inhibitors. They do not get added, and they never multiply with respect to each other. And it's the multiplication effect of the synchrony that is what drives the laser process. Beyond that, I'm having trouble sort of thinking through all the roles of absence, but clearly it's a constraint process. It's amplifying a constraint. It's amplifying a range of phase and a range of frequencies, very narrow, because of that, because those are the only ones that resonate. Have I got that reasonably right?
Yes, you're talking about absence of modes to laze into. If you don't have those modes, you can't laze into.
Exactly.
The other absence I was talking about is called spontaneous emission. It's responsible for almost all the light we see, the light from the sun and everything like this. And it happens to be random in nature as opposed to organized.
Yes.
And the one of the ways of talking about is that the vacuum mode causes a random emission process as opposed to a stimulated emission process. So there's a qualitative difference between laser light and usual light that has to do with the absence of photons in those particular modes.
Thank you.
I wonder, I mean, you mentioned that time is a mystery of all mysteries, and I wonder if maybe you could say something about what everything that you're talking about has to do with possibly time being primary in the universe, not eternal, more along the lines of what a physicist like Lee Smolin would be talking about. Have you thought about that?
Thought a lot about it. The paper ends with a wild speculation about the nature of time. And certainly it's something, I should say, that I've been afraid to ever put into paper and to ever send out. So you guys, I'm hoping it's safe. But, we all say crazy things once in a while, but, you want to have the opportunity to say it. I'm using an argument that's it's really undeveloped. But I'll try to give you a sense of it. It develops out of the Gödelian notion. The Gödelian notion is basically, as I see it, if you take it in large, as something about the nature of existence. What it says is that there isn't such a thing as fixed existence. It's always with respect to what it's not. But the very nature, and we see this in whether it's the Lyra's paradox or whatever else, each when you get a contradictory statement, not a paradoxical system, it basically says that it can't be static. It can't be not changing. But change, this is why change is, in a sense, the mystery. And here I want to be clear, we're not talking about times error. We're talking about the fact of change. Why it isn't just a block. Okay. Now, I play on, towards the end of this argument, I play on the use of what's often called imaginary numbers. I think imaginary numbers, I think it's a terrible name. I wish it wasn't called imaginary numbers, but that's what they're called. And it produces imaginary numbers also are a liar's paradox, effectively. So the idea is what times itself is equivalent to the number -1, or any negative number. And if that's true, and I actually lay it out in detail in the paper, what that means is if we use I, which is the standard one that people use to talk about this value, I times I equals -1. But that means that I equals -1 over I, if you divide both sides by I. And that means I equals a negative. But in fact, since there's I down here, you can substitute it again. It's recursive. Now, if I equals -1 over I, that means that I also equals -1 over -1 over I. Which means that I can equal -1 over -1 over -1 over I, and so on ad infinitum. In other words, it alternates from positive to negative, but never finishes. The problem with the imaginary numbers is that, like the liar's paradox, it's an unfinishable, undecidable. It's not negative, and it's not positive, and it's not a contradiction. It's an undecidable. But now here's the interesting thing. With I, there can be a negative I. So there's a standard sort of move. J times J equals -I. If J times J equals -I, that means that J equals -I over J, which is negative I over -I over J. It's better if I showed it, but basically what happens is that no matter how you do it, because you've created a new number line in which you're treating I like unity, there's always the possibility to generate yet another number line with, again, the negative of I. And then, again, the negative of J. And then the negative of, you can't stop. Now, there is a use of this. We use imaginary numbers in all kinds of ways because they actually are creating a second dimension. Whenever you use this, it means that you can use the real number line to create a new dimension. So you can have in a sense, a two-dimensional phenomenon or a two-dimensional variation, using complex numbers as it's typically called, with a simple equation. The point I want to make is if you don't have a convention that says you have to stop, there's a theory called quaternion theory that says stop at 4. But in fact, it's a convention. You just do it because you can use it. You can't stop generating dimensionality. The value of each of these is the same at 0. So every one of these dimensions overlaps at 0. But you can't stop creating new ones, any more than you can stop calculating the plus minus around. It suggests to me that the dimensionality of the universe is potentially incompletable in this deep sense. Not just that it's eternal, but in a sense it's trans-eternal in some sense in this respect. Now, there's an extra step in this I'm not going to go into, but it's about why there's only 3 fixed dimensions, so-called spatial dimensions, and then something else. This is a view that basically is an attack on the Einsteinian universe. He's my great hero. Okay. But I actually think that thinking about time as a single dimension is an error. I think it's the incompletability of dimensionality which is what's necessary for true emergence. If you have one dimension, the fourth dimension, and it's just that we don't get all the moments, we're just in one place in it at some point in time. Even if you allow quantum indeterminacy at every moment, the whole thing is already fixed. It's a block universe. It's fixed, it's done, it's perfect. That's the perfect universe, in which case there's no real emergence. There's no true emergence. I happen to think it's the other way around. I think that dimensionality itself is incomplete. And that time is that piece.
Yeah.
That was a great answer to close the session. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's thank all 6 of our speakers today.